Welcome back to Esther Explained. In the previous episode, we watched Haman rise to a position of great power within the Persian Empire. We also saw Mordecai refuse to bow before him, an act that deeply offended the king's highest official. But what begins as a personal conflict is about to become something far more dangerous. As Esther chapter 3 continues, Haman's anger grows into a plan that reaches far beyond Mordecai himself, a plan that will place an entire people under a sentence of death. And yet, even as human schemes unfold, another story is quietly unfolding behind the scenes. Mordecai's refusal to bow had wounded Haman's pride. But this was no longer simply a personal insult. As we saw in episode 6, the text has already identified Haman as an Agagite, a detail that may point back to the ancient Amalekites, long-standing enemies of Israel. Centuries earlier, after the Amalekites attacked the Israelites during the Exodus, God declared, "The Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation." God declared this, not the people. So why was God so decisively against Amalek? What made the Amalekites especially notorious in his sight? For this, we have to go back to Israel's first encounter with them. Moses wrote concerning it, "Remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way, when you were come forth out of Egypt, how he met thee by the way and smote the hindmost of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, when thou wast faint and weary, and he feared not God." So it was not merely that the Amalekites opposed Israel, but how they did so. Rather than showing mercy to the weak and vulnerable, the Amalekites preyed upon them, and even more, they did so, Moses tells us, without fear of God. Whether Haman himself understood the full significance of that history, we cannot know. But the author of Esther appears to want his readers to remember it. This conflict did not begin at the king's gate. It reaches back through centuries of memory, hostility, and unfinished history. What began as wounded pride was now growing into something far darker. Haman no longer wanted revenge on Mordecai alone. He wanted to destroy Mordecai's entire people. A personal grievance was becoming a campaign of annihilation. The text then tells us that in the 12th year of King Xerxes, the first month, the month of Nisan, Haman cast the lot. To modern readers, this may seem like a curious detail, but throughout the ancient world, people often cast lots, consulted astrologers, or practiced various forms of divination before making important decisions. Kings sought favorable days for battles. Merchants sought favorable times for journeys. Haman, however, is seeking a favorable day for something far more sinister. He is not simply choosing a date on a calendar. He is searching for what he believes to be the perfect moment to destroy an entire people. Exactly how this process of casting lots worked is unclear. Perhaps the lots were cast repeatedly as Haman searched for what he believed to be the most favorable day. Or perhaps, as some commentators suggest, the lot was cast over and over to determine both the month and the day. What is clear is that Haman was not merely choosing a date. He was seeking a date that he believed fate itself had approved, a day destined for success. Yet the timing is poignant, for this casting of the lots takes place during the month of Nisan. Why is this important? For the Jewish people, Nisan was the month of Passover, the month in which they remembered God's great deliverance from Egypt centuries earlier. So while the Jews remembered God's deliverance from Egypt, Haman, one of the most powerful men in the empire, was quietly plotting their annihilation, just as his ancestors had sought to do centuries before. And as the story unfolds, we will discover another chilling similarity. The Amalekites had attacked Israel when the people were weary, vulnerable, and unable to defend their weakest members. Haman's plan would create a different kind of vulnerability. His decree would place Jewish communities throughout the empire under a sentence of death, scattered among many peoples and separated by vast distances. When the appointed day arrived, every Jewish man, woman, and child would stand exposed to the same danger, the weak and the strong, the old and the young. All alike would face a threat from which there appeared to be no escape. But there is one more detail we should notice. The royal secretaries were summoned on the 13th day of Nisan. The very next day would mark the beginning of Passover, the annual remembrance of Israel's deliverance from Egypt. As God's people prepared to celebrate the salvation of an earlier generation, the documents authorizing their destruction in the year 474 BC were being prepared in the palace of Susa. The irony could hardly be greater. The month of deliverance had become the month in which Haman launched what he hoped would be the final destruction of the Jewish people. Yet there is another detail that deserves our attention. While Haman believed he was placing his confidence in chance, the reader is invited to see something very different unfolding behind the scenes. For the final date selected was not a few days away, or even a few weeks away. The lot fell on the 12th month, the month of Adar. And in verse 13, we learn even the date of the attack that was meant to kill all Jews and plunder their possessions, the 13th day of Adar, exactly 11 months away. At first, this may seem like an unimportant detail, but throughout the Book of Esther, timing will prove to be anything but accidental. The date chosen by the lot, by chance, by whatever it was Haman believed in, would give him 11 months to prepare his wicked plan. Yet those same 11 months would also provide time for events to unfold that none of the players in this drama, not Haman, not the king, not Esther the queen, nor even Mordecai at this point could possibly foresee. Had the chosen day fallen only weeks later, events might have unfolded very differently. But the delay created the most important thing for humans living under such a terrible sentence: time. Time for Esther, time for Mordecai, time for circumstances within the palace to change. Again and again throughout Esther, we see how delays become instruments of providence. What appears to be an obstacle often becomes the very means through which deliverance arrives. The Book of Proverbs, chapter 16, verse 33, says, "The lot is cast into the lap, but the whole disposing thereof is of the Lord." The man who trusted in fate, Haman, believed the future had now been secured, but the reader already senses that another hand is at work behind the scenes, quietly directing human history. The lot had been cast, the date for a horrific event had been chosen. Yet the story is only beginning. Having selected a date, Haman now turns his attention to the king. Notice the order of events. The lot has already been cast. The day has already been chosen. In Haman's mind, the plan is already taking shape. He does not first seek the king's approval and then determine a date. He determines the date before ever approaching the king. The destruction of the Jews is no longer merely an idea. It is already a plan. What Haman now requires is the authority to carry it out. Hatred alone could not accomplish what he desired. If he was to destroy the Jews throughout the empire, he would need something far greater than personal influence. He would need royal authority. What follows is one of the most chilling speeches in the entire book. For Haman does not approach the king with the full information. He never mentions the Jews by name. He never explains his personal and perhaps historical conflict with Mordecai. He never reveals that this entire scheme has grown out of a wounded pride and ancestral hatred. Instead, he carefully presents his case in a way designed to provoke the king's concern. "There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom," he says. Notice how vague the accusation is. Haman speaks of a certain people, but he does not identify them. The king is being asked to make a decision about an entire nation without even being told who they are. But at this point, we may wonder something. Why doesn't the king ask more questions? Why doesn't he ask who these people are? Why doesn't he investigate the accusations before agreeing to such a drastic course of action? As we discussed in the previous episode, some historians believe that the years following Xerxes' failed Greek campaign brought changes to the king himself. However, part of the answer may lie in something else as well, a pattern we have already seen throughout the book. Again and again, King Ahasuerus appears willing to place immense trust in those around him. He relies heavily upon advisors, and he delegates authority freely. And when strong recommendations are placed before him, he often acts quickly. Whether this reflects confidence, indifference, exhaustion, or simply the habits of an emperor accustomed to others managing the details, the text does not say. Perhaps even the sheer size of the empire prevented him, a single man, from doing anything else. What is clear is that this pattern appears repeatedly throughout the book, and perhaps that helps explain what happens here. Haman does not present evidence. He offers accusations. He does not identify the people he is condemning. Yet the king asks no recorded questions, and at this moment, the Book of Esther quite clearly shows that no official stood higher in the king's favor than Haman. So Haman continues to move toward his goal. Their laws are diverse from those of every other people. Neither keep they the king's laws. Esther 3:8. Like many effective deceptions, Haman's accusation contains a small element of truth mixed with a much larger distortion. The Jewish people did have customs and religious practices that distinguished them from many of their neighbors. They worshipped one God. They observed their own holy days. They followed laws given centuries earlier through Moses. But Haman transforms difference into danger. What he presents as evidence of disloyalty is simply evidence of identity. The issue is not that the Jews are rebelling against the empire. The issue is that they are different. And difference in Haman's hands becomes a weapon. Having planted suspicion in the king's mind, Haman then moves quickly toward his desired conclusion. It is not for the king's profit to suffer them. In other words, their continued existence is presented as a problem for the empire itself. A personal grievance is now disguised as a matter of state security. The conclusion Haman wants the king to draw is false, but it is politically effective. Having planted suspicion in the king's mind, Haman now moves toward his desired outcome. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed. Esther chapter 3, verse 9. The request is astonishing. Haman is not asking for a tax, a punishment, or a restriction. He is asking for the destruction of an entire people. And then he adds something else: money. I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business, to bring it into the king's treasuries. This was no small offer. 10,000 talents represented an enormous sum of money, one so large that it would have attracted the attention of any ruler. Exactly how Haman intended to obtain such wealth is not stated directly. However, many scholars believe he expected it to come from the property and possessions of the Jewish people that would be seized throughout the empire once the decree was carried out. Whether or not that was his plan, the offer reveals something important. Haman is not merely appealing to fear. He is appealing to profit. The proposal is carefully constructed. The Jews are presented as a threat to the empire. Their destruction is presented as beneficial to the empire, and the king is assured that the royal treasury will not suffer as a result. The argument is as calculated as it is ruthless. Yet the king's response is even more unnerving. Perhaps it is one of the most unsettling moments in the entire book. So the king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman. Esther 3:10. The signet ring was no ordinary piece of jewelry. It carried the authority of the king himself. Documents sealed with it became official law throughout the empire. With a single gesture, The king places enormous power into Haman's hands, far more than he had possessed before when Mordecai first refused to bow. Then the king replies, "The silver is given to thee, the people also, to do with them as it seemeth good to thee." Esther 3:11. Whether the king literally intended to refuse the money or was simply expressing complete confidence in his highest official is difficult to know. What is clear is that the discussion ends almost as quickly as it began. No investigation is ordered, no evidence is requested, no questions are recorded. The identity of the people remains unnamed, yet the authority to destroy them has already been granted. The man who came seeking permission now possesses the king's seal, the king's very seal, and with it, the power to transform one man's personal hatred into a law that would affect not just the Jews, but the entire empire. Once the king's approval had been secured, events moved quickly. Then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month. Esther 3:12. The eve of Passover. That detail may easily escape our notice. The very next day, Jewish families throughout the empire would begin remembering God's great deliverance from Egypt centuries earlier. Yet at that very moment, in the palace of Susa, documents were being prepared that would authorize their destruction. And for Christian listeners, there is perhaps another quiet reminder here. Passover would one day become the season in which Jesus Christ, the promised seed first spoken of in Genesis 3:15, would offer himself for the salvation of the world. Once again, at the very time when destruction seemed to be advancing, God was already preparing a deliverance far greater than anyone could yet see. But neither Haman, nor the king, nor anyone else in the palace could see that. The decision had been made. Now, the machinery of the Persian Empire was set into motion. Persia stretched across vast territories and governed peoples who spoke many different languages. From the Indians in the east to the Ethiopians in the southwest, and among Persians, Medes, Babylonians, Egyptians, Jews, Greeks of Asia Minor, and many others throughout the empire, countless peoples lived under the authority of the great king. Yet the empire possessed an administrative system capable of carrying the king's commands to distant regions with remarkable efficiency. The decree was written for each province in its own script, and for each people in its own language. No one would misunderstand what had been ordered. And what exactly had been ordered? The language leaves little room for doubt. The decree commanded that all the Jews were to be destroyed on the 13th day of Adar, young and old, men and women, children as well as adults. The destruction was to be total. Nor was it merely a matter of so completely hurting so many lives. The decree also authorized the seizure of their possessions. Once again, we see that hatred and profit have become partners. The same empire that could unite many peoples under one government was now being used to organize the destruction of one particular people throughout its vast territories. The decree was written in the king's name. It carried the king's seal. And now it would travel to every corner of the empire. The couriers departed at once. Across the empire, the king's command was now on its way. And then comes one of the most remarkable contrasts in the entire book. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city Shushan was perplexed. Esther 3:15. The king and Haman sit down together, yet what each man may have been celebrating was likely very different. Perhaps the king saw only another matter of state successfully concluded, a troublesome people dealt with, and a vast sum of silver promised to the royal treasury, always welcomed. Haman, however, knew far more than the king. He knew this decree had grown out of his hatred for Mordecai and his desire to destroy the Jewish people. The king appears unaware of the personal vengeance that lies behind it all. And then there is the city of Susa. The king and Haman are at ease. But the city is bewildered. Why had such an order been given? Why had an entire people suddenly been marked for destruction? Perhaps the citizens of Susa knew Jewish neighbors. Perhaps they knew Jewish merchants, craftsmen, officials, or friends. Almost certainly they did. If the Jews had been so marked, could such a thing happen to other groups of people as well? As news of the decree spread through the city, many must have struggled to understand it. The text leaves us with a striking contrast between the comfort of the palace and the anxiety of the city. The king was at ease. Haman was satisfied. The people of the city, hearing of a new law that was to be carried out nearly 11 months in the future, were troubled, perplexed, and troubled. Nor were the people of the royal city of Susa likely alone in this perplexity. As the decree spread across the empire, confusion must surely have followed it into many other cities and provinces as well. Yet unfortunately, not everyone would respond with bewilderment. There would be others who shared Haman's prejudice, others willing to profit from the decree, and others prepared to carry it out. The empire is in motion, and for the first time in the story, the threat facing Esther and her people becomes terrifyingly real. It is a sobering picture. Listen to the scriptures from which this episode was taken. Esther chapter 3, verses 6 through 15. And he thought scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had showed him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. In the first month, that is, the month Nisan, in the 12th year of King Ahasuerus, they cast pur, that is, the lot, before Haman from day to day, and from month to the 12th month, that is, the month Adar. And Haman said unto King Ahasuerus, There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all people. Neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have the charge of the business, to bring it into the king's treasuries. And the king took his ring from his hand, and gave it unto Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. And the king said unto Haman, The silver is given to thee, the people also, to do with them as it seemeth good to thee. Then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants, and to the governors that were over every province, and to the rulers of every people of every province according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus was it written, and sealed with the king's ring. And the letters were sent by posts into all the king's provinces, to destroy, to kill, and to cause to perish all Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. The copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, that they should be ready against that day. The posts went out, being hastened by the king's commandment, and the decree was given in Shushan the palace. And the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city Shushan was perplexed. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Esther. If you would like to continue the story, you are warmly invited to subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss future episodes as they are shared. New episodes are released regularly, and if you think others might enjoy this slower, reflective journey through Scripture, I would be grateful if you shared the series with them. Thank you again for being here.